Michael, please, the doctor said 6 weeks. My body is still healing.
The doctor is not my wife. You are my wife.
Please, I'm in pain.
You have no reason to keep saying no to me.
Michael, please, I am not ready.
If you don't agree right now, I will bring in another woman into this house.
Esther, what happened to you?
I begged him to wait, but he wouldn't listen.
What do you mean?
I was too afraid to keep saying no.
My sister told me everything before she died.
What happens between a husband and wife is nobody else's business.
She is dead because she was afraid of you.
I wish this wasn't a true story, but it is. My sister gave her husband 5 children in just 4 years. 5 beautiful children, yet the man still wasn't satisfied. She survived a C-section and gave birth to a healthy baby. But what happened 4 days after she gave birth left 5 innocent children without a mother and changed our family forever. My name is Deborah. I was sitting in my shop on a Tuesday afternoon, counting fabric samples and thinking about nothing more serious than whether I had enough Ankara for the order coming in on Friday. My phone rang. I almost didn't pick it up because I didn't recognize the number. Something in my chest told me to answer it. I don't know how to explain that feeling. It was like the air in the room changed before I even pressed the green button. Please, are you Deborah, sister to Esther Michael? My heart dropped before the woman even finished her sentence. Yes, I am. What happened? What happened to my sister? You need to come to General Hospital right away. Your sister, she is losing a lot of blood. The situation is serious. I dropped everything. I left my shop open. I left my phone on the counter. I left my customer mid-sentence. I ran to the road and flagged down the first Okada I saw. The whole ride to that hospital, I kept telling myself it was nothing serious. Esther had just given birth 4 days ago. Yes, 4 days. She had delivered her 5th child, a baby girl, through a cesarean section at that same hospital. I told myself they probably just needed someone to come sign a form or donate blood. I told myself my sister was fine. I had been telling myself my sister was fine for 4 years. Esther got married in 2021. She was 23 years old, fresh-faced, full of laughter, and completely in love with a man named Michael. I liked Michael at first. He was charming, well-dressed, and he spoke well. Our mother cried happy tears on Esther's wedding day. We all thought she had found gold. Within the first 12 months, Esther was pregnant. We celebrated. A boy. Beautiful, healthy, strong. Before that boy could even walk properly, Esther was pregnant again. Another boy. Then came a girl, then another girl. By the time she was carrying her 5th child in early 2025, Esther was 27 years old and her body looked like it had lived 40 hard years. I noticed it. Our mother noticed it. But Esther always had an explanation. She was tired, she was managing, she was fine. She was never fine. We just didn't push hard enough to find out the truth. When I arrived at the hospital, I ran through the corridor until a nurse stopped me and pointed me toward the ward at the far end. The smell of antiseptic hit me, the sound of machines beeping, and then I pushed open the door and I saw her. Esther was lying on a bed with tubes going into her arms. Her face was pale, far too pale for a woman her age. Her lips were dry and cracked. Her eyes were open, and when she saw me, the tears started falling immediately. Not slow tears, the kind that pour out from a person who has been holding them back for a very long time. Deborah. Her voice came out like a whisper, like it cost her something just to say my name. I rushed to her side and grabbed her hand. It felt cold, too cold. Esther, what happened? Talk to me. What is going on? She opened her mouth and then she closed it again. She looked toward the door as if she was checking whether someone had followed me in. That look on her face, that frightened, checking look, told me more than any words could have. Something had been happening inside that marriage, something she had been hiding from all of us. And now, Whatever it was, it had landed her here. I held her hand tighter. Esther, look at me. Whatever it is, you can tell me now. Tell me everything. She took a slow, painful breath, and then she began to talk. The first thing Esther told me was that she was sorry. I wanted to shake her. I wanted to tell her that she had nothing, absolutely nothing to be sorry about. But I held myself together because I could see how much energy it was taking her just to speak. So I stayed quiet. I held her hand and I let her talk. Michael is a good father, she started, and I almost interrupted her right there. But she continued. At least he loves the children, in his own way. But Deborah, the way he has treated me inside that house, I have been dying slowly for 4 years. She told me everything in pieces, the way someone tells a story they have rehearsed in their head alone for many nights, but never said out loud to another human being. From the very first year of their marriage, Michael controlled her body like it belonged to him. Not in a loving way, not in a way that had anything to do with care or connection. He wanted what he wanted, when he wanted it, and he did not believe that Esther's feelings on the matter were relevant. If she said she was tired, he told her that a wife was not supposed to be tired for her husband. If she said she was unwell, he told her she was exaggerating. If she turned away from him, he would sit at the edge of the bed and tell her that there were women outside who would not make him beg. That threat was his weapon. He used it constantly. Every time Esther tried to draw a boundary, he held that threat over her head like a knife. And Esther, my sweet, gentle, terrified sister, believed him. She believed that if she did not give him whatever he wanted, he would leave. Or worse, he would bring another woman into the home and humiliate her in front of her own children. So she stopped saying no. She stopped saying no even when her body was swollen from pregnancy. She stopped saying no even when she was recovering from one birth and already carrying the next. 5 children in 4 years was not an accident. It was the result of a woman who had been told in every way, except the exact words, that her body was not her own. After I had the operation this time, Esther said, her voice shaking, he said I needed at least 6 weeks before anything. 6 weeks minimum. My wound was still fresh, Deborah. I could feel it pulling when I tried to sit up. I felt sick. I already knew where this was going, but I needed to hear her say it. She begged Michael. I told him what the doctor said. I showed him the paper they gave me at discharge. He looked at the paper and he put it down and he looked at me and he said, she stopped, pressing her lips together. He said, the doctor was not his wife. He said I was his wife. He said if I could walk to the kitchen and cook, I could do everything else. The machines beeped quietly around us. I said no the first night. He got up and took his phone outside and came back 2 hours later smelling of cigarettes and something else. He didn't say a word to me. The next morning he didn't greet me, he didn't look at me, he treated me like I was not in that house. And the children were asking why Daddy was not talking to Mommy. And she squeezed my hand. I gave in, Deborah. Not once, 3 times in 3 days, because each time I thought it would make things normal again. Each time I thought if I just let him have this, he would let me rest after. But it was never enough. It was never. She winced suddenly, and I called for the nurse immediately. The nurse came, checked her vitals, adjusted something on the drip, and told me in a low voice that Esther had suffered serious internal bleeding. The C-section wound had been disrupted. Her body, which had been trying desperately to heal, had been pushed past what it could handle. I sat back down next to my sister and I looked at her and I felt something harden inside of me, something that has never fully softened since that day. Why didn't you call me, Esther? Why didn't you tell anyone? She looked at me with those tired, wet eyes and she said something that I have turned over in my mind every single day since. Because I was ashamed, Deborah. I thought if people knew, they would say I was a bad wife. I thought they would say I couldn't manage my home. I was protecting him. Even now, lying here, my first thought when they knew they were calling you was that I hope you don't think badly of him. I could not speak. I just held her hand. She had nearly killed herself trying to protect the reputation of a man who had not once tried to protect her life. If you are watching this and you feel like this story is speaking to something you have seen or experienced, stay with me. This story is not over yet. And before we go further, if you haven't subscribed to Raina Tales, do it right now. Because stories like Esther's need to be told, and they need to reach every woman who needs to hear them. The doctor came in that evening and spoke to me outside the ward. He was a serious man with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and he did not waste my time with soft language. He told me that Esther had lost a significant amount of blood, that the internal damage was extensive, that they were doing everything they could, but the situation had gone on too long before she was brought in. I asked him what he meant by that. He told me that Esther had been experiencing symptoms for more than a day before she finally allowed a neighbor, not Michael, a neighbor, to bring her to the hospital. A full day of deteriorating health, alone in her house, and she had told nobody. "Where is the husband?" the doctor asked me. I didn't have an answer. I had tried to call Michael 3 times since I arrived. He had not picked up. I went back into the ward and I sat with Esther. She was weaker now than when I had first arrived. Talking had taken something out of her, but she didn't want to stop. It was as if she knew, the way people sometimes know, that this was the only window she was going to have, the only chance to say out loud the things that had lived inside her in silence for 4 years. She talked about the children. She described each one to me as if I didn't already know them, as if she needed to say their names and their personalities out loud one more time. Her firstborn, David, who was already protective of his younger ones and always stood between them and any trouble. Her second son, Emmanuel, who laughed at everything and made the whole house noisy. Her first daughter, Grace, who was only 2 and already had Esther's same quiet, watchful eyes. Her second daughter, Joy, barely 1 year old, still unsteady on small legs. And then the new baby, the tiny girl she had only held for 3 days before her body began to fail, whom she had named Peace. Deborah, her voice was very quiet now, almost a breath. Take care of them. Don't let Michael's family take them somewhere I cannot reach. Take care of my children. Esther, stop talking like that. You are going to promise me. I promised her. She closed her eyes for a moment and then opened them again. She was looking at the ceiling when she said the next thing. Tell my children I loved them. Tell them their mother was not weak. I didn't know how to choose myself. Nobody ever taught me that I was allowed to. I was crying by then, silently, trying not to let her see how frightened I was. Michael finally arrived at the hospital at almost 9 o'clock that night. He walked in smelling of alcohol, his shirt not fully tucked in, and he stood at the foot of Esther's bed for less than 2 minutes. He patted her leg twice. He said, "You will be fine," the way a person says something they are not really thinking about. Then he stepped outside to make a phone call. He did not hold her hand. He did not ask the doctor any questions. He did not sit down. Esther watched him leave the room and her face went very still and very calm. The kind of calm that comes when a person has finally accepted something they had been refusing to accept for a long time. She looked at me. "He's not going to change," she said, simply, quietly, like it was a fact she was just now writing down somewhere permanent inside herself. Those were almost the last words she said to me. By midnight, the nurses were moving faster around her bed. By 2 in the morning, a doctor I hadn't seen before came running in. I was pushed to the corridor. I stood outside that door with my hand over my mouth, listening to the sounds of people fighting to save my sister's life. At 3:47 in the morning, A nurse came out and looked at me with that face that nurses learn to make, that face that prepares you before the words come. Esther was gone, 27 years old, mother of 5 children, the youngest of them 4 days old. Gone. The days after Esther's death were the worst days of my life, worse than the night she died, because at least that night I was in shock. In the days that followed, the shock wore off, and what replaced it was a grief so heavy and so hot that I could barely stand upright under it. But I had made a promise. 5 children were waiting. Michael's family arrived from their hometown by the second day. Aunties and uncles who had never once visited while Esther was alive, who had never called to ask how she was managing with 5 children in 4 years, who had never questioned a single thing Michael did. They arrived now, filling the compound with noise and opinion and a version of events that I recognized immediately as a lie. According to Michael's family, Esther had been sickly from birth. According to Michael's family, she had not properly followed the doctor's advice after her surgery. According to Michael's family, these things sometimes happened and it was God's will and nobody was to blame. Michael himself walked around the compound receiving condolences with a face arranged into the appropriate sadness. He shook hands, he accepted food, he let people pat his shoulder and call him a strong man. At one point, I watched him accept a hug from the pastor who had married him and Esther, and I felt something rise inside me that I had to physically press back down. On the 3rd day, I asked to speak to Michael privately. We sat in the small parlor of the house where my sister had lived and suffered and bled, and I looked at this man directly and I said, "Michael, I know what happened. Esther told me everything before she died." He looked at me without flinching. "Deborah, you are grieving. You are not thinking clearly." She told me about the pressure, about the threats, about what happened after the surgery. 3 times in 3 days, Michael. She told me everything. He leaned back in his chair. He actually leaned back. She is my wife, was my wife. What happens between a husband and his wife in their home is their business. Nobody from outside can come and judge what they don't understand. She is dead, and I am grieving. His voice stayed calm, controlled, almost bored. I loved Esther. These things happen. Women die after childbirth all the time. It is not anyone's fault. I stood up. I was shaking. Not from fear. I was past fear. I was shaking from something else entirely. "You will not rewrite her story," I told him, "not while I am alive." That was when I made my decision. I went home and I began to write everything down. Every word Esther had told me in that hospital room, every detail. I wrote it down clearly, the way Esther had told it, in her own words, as closely as I could remember them. I showed it to my mother. I showed it to 2 of Esther's close friends who, when I told them, looked at each other with the expression of people who had suspected something for a long time but never had words for it. They had their own things to add, things they had noticed, things Esther had half said to them over the years and then quickly taken back. The picture that came together was complete and devastating. Esther had not died because of bad luck. Esther had died because she was terrified to say no to the man who was supposed to love her. And that man was now sitting in her house, eating other people's food, receiving sympathy and feeling no shame whatsoever. I was not going to let that stand. I want to be honest with you. Justice in real life does not always arrive the way it does in films. There is no single dramatic moment where everything snaps back into place and the wrong is made perfectly right. What happened to Esther cannot be undone. Her 5 children will grow up without her mother. That wound will never fully close. But what I can tell you is this: truth, when it is finally spoken out loud, changes things. I started sharing Esther's story, not with names changed, not softened, not polished into something easier to hear. I told it exactly as it happened to anyone who would listen, in every space where I had a voice. I told it to women in our church. I told it to the market women who had known Esther since she was a girl. I told it to the young wives in our neighborhood who had always admired Michael because he dressed well and drove a nice car. People did not want to believe it at first. That is always the first response, disbelief. Because it is more comfortable to believe that a man who looks good and speaks well is a good man. It is more comfortable to believe that a woman who died after childbirth simply had bad luck. It is easier than accepting that we were all standing close enough to the truth to touch it, and we chose not to look. But the truth kept spreading. One of Esther's friends came forward and shared a voice note Esther had sent her in 2023, a voice note she had never played for anyone out of respect for Esther's privacy. In that voice note, Esther was crying. She described exactly what she had described to me in the hospital, in her own voice, in her own words. When that voice note began to circulate, something shifted. The community that had been protecting Michael with their silence began to step back from him. The pastor who had patted Michael's shoulder came to my house and sat down and listened for 2 full hours. He left looking like a man who had a great deal to think about. Michael's own brother, a quiet man I had always thought kept to himself, called me one evening and said in a low voice, "Deborah, I tried to talk to Michael 2 years ago about how he was treating her. I didn't listen to me. I should have tried harder. I am sorry." He was crying on the phone. I told him his guilt, however real, needed to be directed somewhere useful. He asked me what he could do. I told him, "Help me make sure those children are not taken from me." The legal process was not quick or simple. Michael's family fought me. There were court dates and delays and people who tried to pressure me to drop it and keep the peace. But I had Esther's voice in my memory. I had her hand in mine in that hospital room. I had her asking me to promise. I did not drop it. Michael lost custody of the 5 children. The full details of what had led to Esther's death became part of the court record. It is there now, documented, official, permanent. Michael's good name in that community, the name he had spent years building, was stripped back to what was underneath it. He is not in prison because the law, as it stands, does not yet have the right words for what he did. But that is a fight I am still part of. That fight is not over. What I can tell you is that today, Esther's 5 children are with me. David, Emmanuel, Grace, Joy, and little Peace, who will never know her mother except through the stories I will spend the rest of my life telling her. Every night, I tell them about Esther. Not the version of Esther who was afraid, not the Esther who couldn't say no. I tell them about the Esther who laughed loudly and danced in the kitchen when a good song came on the radio. The Esther who could cook jollof rice that made grown men cry. The Esther who once stood in the rain for 40 minutes to flag down a bus for an old woman she didn't even know. The Esther who loved them so completely that even in her final hours, when she was running out of time and energy, the only thing she wanted to talk about was them. That is who her mother was. That is who she will always be in this house. Esther did not die because she was weak. She died because she was surrounded by a world that had never once taught her that her life was worth protecting, even from the person who was supposed to love her most. I am telling this story because Esther could not tell it herself. I am telling it for every woman who is lying in a bed somewhere too afraid to call her sister, too ashamed to say what is happening behind closed doors, too convinced that keeping the family together is worth more than keeping herself alive. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to heal. You are allowed to choose yourself. Your life is not less important than your marriage. Your body is not a sacrifice you owe to anyone. Esther is gone, but her story is not going to be buried with her, not as long as I have breath to speak it. Rest, my sister. I have the children. I have your story. I will not let the world forget you. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it.